Our church is going through our series called The Battle for the Mind, and we've been looking at Craig Groeschel's book along the same lines, Winning the Battle of Your Mind. And last week, in our last YouTube session, we talked about how we have to reframe our thinking. When we're dealing with a tough time, we're struggling with whatever's going on, and we're wondering, where is God? Did I do something wrong? Why isn't he doing things that I think he should be doing? Craig Groeschel talks about looking back in your life and going, okay, in my history, did God ever say no to something at a time, and I had to deal with that? And it wasn't revealed to me why until later, when he brought in something better than what I had intended. Or I found out what I had thought wasn't such a good idea as it all played out. They didn't turn out to be what I thought they were, or the situation didn't turn out to be what I thought it was. And I had to go, wow, okay, after the fact, I came to some conclusions about the goodness of God. I think about the girl I wanted to marry, and God said no, and it didn't work out. And if I'd have married her, I'd have never met my wife, Lori. I think about, I wanted to be an Olympic wrestler, and I got sick, and in my whole senior year of college wrestling, went to pot, and God moved me into something different and better at that time. I can look back in my life and go, God had something better in mind, but there was this gap I was living in. At that time, in the wrestling career, it was a 3-year period of time. In the not marrying who I wanted to marry till the Lord brought my wife into play was a 7-year period of time of me wrestling. Why didn't God do this? And when we look back, we can see it. God had a plan, but I had to live through that gap, even in the past. And now I bring it to my time frame now, and I'm in this gap, and I don't really understand why God's doing what he's doing, but I reframe my thinking. I remember the last time I was here, I remember God had a plan, that there is hope, that he works things out, and it helps me get through this gap until God reveals what's next. Now that led to this question: what happens when something happens right now in my life that it doesn't feel like God can redeem? It feels like there's no way it can be fixed. Let me give you some examples. Like your child has cancer and they die. I mean, how does God redeem that? In my case with my wife, he said no to the one I thought I wanted to bring me something better. Well, nothing can replace my son. Nothing can replace my loved one. So what do I do when it seems like God didn't answer at all? As a pastor, I work with people who have had horrible things happen in their life, and they'll often ask me, why didn't God do this or that? And oftentimes I have to give this answer: I don't know. I don't know. In fact, I still have things that have happened, and I still haven't seen good come out of it. That doesn't mean there isn't good that's come out of it. It doesn't mean that I see everything. I don't know everything. I still have a list. If the Lord were to take me to heaven right now, I have a list of questions for the Lord, and I know he'll answer them at those times. And I believe that when I face him, he's going to say, let me tell you what would have happened, could have happened, what did happen. Here's what you didn't know. And I think that's going to lead to me falling on my face before the Lord and going, Lord, why did I ever question you? I mean, you are so amazing. I believe that's what will happen, but I still have questions. So what do I do when I don't really understand what's happened and I don't see a way out? And what I wanted, like a loss of a child, I didn't want that. I wanted them to live and have the marriage, or I wanted my husband not to die, or my wife not to die, or whatever it is. And it seems to have gone bad. What do I do? Well, again, I can't answer the specific questions, but what I can say is, here's what I do know. I do know that this world isn't the way God wanted it to be. Death wasn't a part of the original plan. It came because of sin. And so I do know that this isn't what God wanted. I think about Lazarus dying, and it says that Jesus wept. Why did he weep? Well, because he was looking at things from our perspective and how tragic it looks. And when he put himself in our position and empathized, knowing what we knew, he understood our pain. There are things that happen down here that are painful. That's the consequence of the world we live in. This wasn't God's original plan. I do know that he sees things differently than I do. I do know that he doesn't see death as something tragic like we do. He sees the day in which we close our eyes and go into the next life as the best day, taking us out of the problems. So he doesn't see death the same way. I was reading Isaiah chapter 57. It says, "The righteous perish, and no one takes it to heart. The devout are taken away, and no one understands that the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Those who walk uprightly enter into peace. They find their rest." And so a lot of times God takes us off of planet Earth because he's trying to spare us from more pain down here. He sees things differently than we see them. Now, what about in the situation of when somebody commits suicide or somebody dies and we think they're not believers? It's true that if a person rejects Jesus and salvation, that they're eternally separated from God. But as human beings, we're not able to see what's going on in the hearts and minds of people. And we're not able to know what happened in its entirety. We can only see and make a judgment based on what we know, but it's an incomplete judgment. I think about the thief on the cross. And you remember the story. There's two thieves, one on the right and one on the left, and one of them is mocking Jesus even while he's on the cross. And the other one says, "Hey, why are you doing this? We deserve what we got. This man doesn't deserve any of this." And he looked at Jesus and he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." In other words, I believe you are the Son of God, and I believe you are the King. And Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And I think about maybe the Jewish family. This was a Jewish young man who this would have been a shame to them. And let's say they just couldn't watch their son die on that cross. And let's just say they weren't there. They weren't there to see the interaction between Jesus and that thief on the cross. They would have thought that their son went through the most horrific thing the Romans could do because he deserved it. Remember, the young man was a thief. He had broken the law. He deserved it. He had rebelled against God. They would have thought, if they weren't there to see it, that young man would have been separated from God, would have been judged, it would have not been raised from the dead to be a part of the kingdom that all the Jews were waiting on. Because they didn't see it, they would have thought it didn't happen. That reminds me of a family member of mine who I had witnessed to for years. He was a devout atheist and would never read any books and just argumentative. And he got sick. And he went into a coma for 30-some days. We thought he was going to die, and I'll never forget, my wife went to stay with him and be in the hospital room with him. And when he came out of a coma, he said, "I've given my life to Jesus." Jesus came and talked to me, and I had an interaction with Jesus. I gave my life to Jesus. And my wife was shocked. I mean, he had rejected Jesus every turn. And yet we thought he was in a coma and out. And what if he'd have died during that time? Here's what this proves to me. That God was working even when we didn't know he was working. Now that gives me great hope. It's true that people are lost if they reject Jesus, but we don't know every interaction. God is pursuing people. He primarily uses people to share the gospel with people, but he's not, dependent on us only. I think about in the Middle East where house churches are meeting in secret, and somebody will show up in the middle of the night, to the house where they're meeting, saying that they'd had a dream and they were told to come to that place to hear about Jesus. it just reminds me of the extent to which Jesus is willing to go to save people. Now, I don't know who's saved and who isn't. That's why we don't get to make the judgment call. Jesus does. But what that does is that gives me hope to know that it's true that if a loved one dies without Christ, they're lost for eternity. But we're not sure who that is. And so when something happens in this gap where we don't know how it ends up in eternity, at least I know that God heard me pray for them. God is working even when I don't see. He's always working. And so how do I get through a gap when I don't understand and this person's dead or that person died or this horrible thing happened? I just have to give it to the Lord and know He loves people more than I do. He knows things I don't know. And it helps me get through this time of grieving so that I can say, God, I don't know what you did with them. I don't know what your purposes are. But you see what I don't see. You love us. You proved it when you sent Jesus on the cross. You're working outside of my visible experience. And I just have to do the right thing, being obedient to you with what I know, following you as I wait to see what you've done and what you're going to do in everything else. And it helps me reframe my thinking so I can survive the valley of the shadow of death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You know things I don't know. And so I'm just able to get through these times based on those things. And I'm praying for you. You may be in one of those gaps right now. Allow God to reframe your thinking so that you start to trust in Him. And though you may not know why He's doing this in that country or with this poor person or that poor person, you know enough about what He's done for you that you can trust Him and be obedient and take the next right step in your gap while you're waiting to see what God does with it. God bless you. I hope you're doing well today.